The marriage notice had been crumpled in Claire's coat pocket for 3 weeks before she finally answered it. Seeking wife. Must be strong, quiet, and unafraid of isolation. No questions asked. Room and board provided. Respond to Ethan Crow, Crow Ranch, 12 miles north of Sunset Ridge, Texas. She'd found it on the floor of the general store in Abilene, half buried under sawdust and boot prints. Someone had probably dropped it on purpose. No woman in her right mind would answer an ad like that. Clinical, cold, offering nothing but survival. It didn't mention love or companionship or even basic kindness, just room and board like she'd be livestock. But Clara wasn't in her right mind anymore. She was broke, alone, and tired of being either. Her husband had been dead 4 months. Thomas Hayes, good man, hard worker, killed by a spooked horse that crushed his skull against a fence post. They'd had 2 years of marriage, barely enough time to learn each other's rhythms, and then he was gone. No children, no savings, just debts that kept growing while Clara tried to hold together a life that had already collapsed. The townspeople had been kind at first. Casseroles, condolences, murmured promises that she'd be taken care of. But kindness had a shelf life, especially when you had nothing to offer in return. Within a month, the casseroles stopped. Within 2, the landlord started asking about rent. Within 3, Clara was washing floors at the saloon for pennies and sleeping in a storage room that smelled like mildew and rat poison. She'd tried everything. Applied to be a school teacher, position filled. Seamstress, too many already. Cook, clerk, laundress, no, no, no. Sunset Ridge didn't need another mouth to feed, and Clara's particular brand of stubborn pride didn't win her any favors. So when she found that crumpled notice, she didn't throw it away. She smoothed it out, read it a dozen times, and started asking questions. That's when she learned about Ethan Crow. "You stay away from that ranch," Mrs. Hutchins had hissed, her face going pale when Clara mentioned the name. "That man's not right." "Not right how?" "Just not." The older woman had leaned in close, voice dropping to a whisper. "My husband saw him once, a couple years back. Said Crow was wearing gloves in the middle of July, coat buttoned to his chin. Wouldn't shake hands, wouldn't even look at folks directly. And his eyes..." She shuddered. Jim said they looked wrong, like something was burning behind them. The stories got worse from there. Crow didn't come to town, ever. He sent his ranch hand, a grizzled man named Dodge, to handle supplies and business. The few people who'd ventured out to the ranch reported that Crow stayed inside, always, even when there was work to be done in the yard. Some said he was hideously scarred. Others claimed he was diseased. A traveling preacher swore Crow was possessed by something unholy, that he'd seen the rancher's shadow move independently in the lamplight. And then there were the darker rumors. 10 years ago, before Crow bought the ranch, he'd been something else, a killer. They called him the Marked One, though no one could agree on why. Some said he'd been a Confederate guerrilla who'd refused to stop fighting after the war ended. Others claimed he'd worked as an enforcer for a railroad company, clearing out homesteaders by any means necessary. A few whispered that he'd been involved in the Red Hollow Massacre, an entire settlement wiped out overnight, bodies found burned and twisted, no survivors to tell what happened. No proof, of course. Never any proof. Just whispers and fear and the shared certainty that Ethan Crow was dangerous. Clara should have walked away. Should have burned the notice and found some other solution. Instead, she wrote him a letter. "Mr. Crow, I am responding to your notice seeking a wife. I am 24 years old, widowed, healthy, and accustomed to hard work. I have no family and no attachments. I do not require affection or companionship, only security and fair treatment. If these terms are acceptable, I will arrive on the afternoon stage next Thursday. Respectfully, Clara Hayes." His response came faster than she expected. 3 days later, Dodge himself delivered it, looking at her like she'd signed her own death warrant. "Mrs. Hayes, your terms are acceptable. I will meet the Thursday stage. Bring what you can carry. We will marry immediately upon your arrival. The arrangement will be permanent unless you choose to leave, in which case I will provide funds for your travel and 3 months' living expenses. E. Crow." No warmth, no reassurance, just the facts, laid out like a business contract. Clara packed her single carpet bag, sold the few items she had left, and bought a stage ticket. Mrs. Hutchins cried when she found out. You're condemning yourself, girl. Whatever he is, whatever he's done, you'll be trapped out there with him. I'm already trapped, Clara had replied quietly. At least this trap comes with a roof. The stage ride to Sunset Ridge took 6 hours, rattling over frozen roads, while Clara tried not to think about what she was doing. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, a young cowboy, kept glancing at her, clearly curious but too polite to ask questions. When they finally rolled into town, Clara stepped down onto the dusty main street and looked around. Sunset Ridge was smaller than Abilene, rougher. False-fronted buildings, a single hotel, saloon, general store, and a church that looked like it was held together by prayer and stubbornness. Maybe 200 people, if that. And standing apart from everyone else, near a weathered wagon, was Ethan Crow. Clara knew it was him before anyone said a word. He stood too still, too separate, like he was surrounded by an invisible wall. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy canvas coat despite the mild weather. Leather gloves. A wide-brimmed hat pulled low enough to shadow his face. He didn't approach the stage, didn't call out a greeting, just watched. Clara picked up her bag and walked toward him. Behind her, she heard the merchant's wife whisper something urgent to her husband. When Clara got within 10 feet, Crow finally moved. He straightened slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his face beneath the hat's brim. Dark hair, unkempt, sharp features, a jaw that looked carved from stone, and his eyes, gray, cold, but not cruel. Wary. Haunted, maybe. Mrs. Hayes, his voice was low, rough from disuse. Mr. Crow? They stared at each other for a moment. Clara refused to look away first. We'll marry now, Crow said abruptly. Preacher's waiting. Then we leave. No small talk, no pretense. Clara nodded. The ceremony took 4 minutes. The preacher, Reverend Mills, looked deeply uncomfortable the entire time, rushing through the words like he wanted to be done before something terrible happened. Crow kept his gloves on, didn't remove his hat. When Mills asked if he would take Clara as his wife, Crow's answer was a single, flat word, yes. When it was Clara's turn, she looked directly at the man she was binding herself to and said, I will. Mills practically threw the marriage certificate at them. You're wed. May the Lord have mercy. Crow took the certificate, folded it once, and slipped it into his coat. Then he turned to Clara. Your bag. She handed it to him. He loaded it into the wagon without a word, then gestured for her to climb up. She did, settling onto the hard wooden seat. Crow swung up beside her, taking the reins, but careful to maintain a foot of space between them. As they rolled out of town, Clara glanced back once. A small crowd had gathered near the general store, watching them leave. Mrs. Hutchins was among them, hands clasped like she was already praying for Clara's soul. The ride to the ranch was silent, except for the creak of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. Clara studied the landscape, rolling scrubland dotted with mesquite and juniper, the occasional windmill marking someone's attempt at settlement. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, pale blue fading to gray at the horizon. After an hour, Crow finally spoke. The ranch isn't much. House, barn, some outbuildings. I run cattle, but not many. Enough to get by. I'm not expecting luxury, Clara said. Good. He paused. There are rules. Clara waited. I keep to myself, Crow continued, his voice tight. I have my space, you'll have yours. I don't do well with people. With touching, you'll need to respect that. All right. I mean it. He shot her a quick glance, and Clara caught the edge of something desperate in his eyes. Don't try to just keep your distance. It's safer. Safer for who? Both of us. Clara didn't respond to that. They rode in silence for another 20 minutes before the ranch came into view. It was exactly what Crow had promised. Not much. A simple 2-story house, weathered but solid, a large barn, a few corrals. Everything practical, nothing decorative. Isolated, surrounded by empty land in every direction. Crow brought the wagon to a stop near the house. He climbed down, grabbed Clara's bag, and headed for the door without waiting for her. Clara followed, taking in her new home. Inside, the house was sparse. A main room with a fireplace, table, and chairs. A small kitchen, stairs leading to the second floor. Everything clean but impersonal, like a place someone occupied but didn't live in. Your room's upstairs, first door on the left, Crow said, setting her bag down. I'm at the end of the hall. There's a lock on your door if you want it. Will I need it? He flinched. Actually flinched. No. But I'm telling you, it's there. Clara nodded slowly. What about meals? I eat early. You can use the kitchen whenever you want. We don't have to... He trailed off, then tried again. We don't have to eat together unless you prefer it. I see. Clara folded her arms. So we're married, but we're strangers who happen to live in the same house. That's the arrangement, Crow said flatly. And you're fine with that? Yes. Why did you want a wife then? Clara pressed. If you don't want company, don't want someone to talk to, don't even want to share meals, why bother? Crow's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was low and bitter. Because the bank requires it. Married men are better credit risks. I needed a loan to expand the herd, and they said I had to prove I was stable, settled. He gestured vaguely at her. Your proof. Clara absorbed that. It shouldn't have stung. She'd known this was a transaction, not a romance. But hearing it stated so bluntly made something in her chest tighten anyway. Fine, she said quietly. Then I'll stay out of your way. Relief flickered across Crow's face, quickly hidden. I'll bring in firewood. Make yourself at home. He left before Clara could respond, the door closing firmly behind him. She stood alone in the empty house, listening to the wind rattle the windows, and wondered what the hell she'd just done. The first week was strange. Clara established a routine quickly. Wake at dawn, make breakfast, clean the house, mend clothes, prepare dinner. Basic domestic work, the kind she'd done her whole life. It should have been familiar, comforting even. Instead, it felt like living with a ghost. Crow was almost never inside when she was. He rose before sunrise, left the house, and didn't return until after dark. Clara would hear him moving around downstairs late at night, the soft creak of floorboards as he made himself a cold meal from whatever she'd left out. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night and hear him pacing in his room, restless footsteps going back and forth for hours. He kept his gloves on constantly, even inside, even when it made simple tasks awkward. Clara watched him struggle to handle tools, grip reins, button his coat, all while maintaining that barrier of leather between his skin and the world, and he avoided her like she was contagious. If Clara entered a room, Crow left it. If she started to speak, he cut her off with a curt nod and walked away. Once, she'd forgotten something in the barn and went out to retrieve it, only to find Crow mucking stalls. He'd taken one look at her, dropped his shovel, and disappeared through the back door without a word. It was insulting and confusing, and it made Clara angry. On the 8th day, she decided she'd had enough. She waited until evening when Crow came in for his nightly foraging in the kitchen. Clara was sitting at the table mending one of his shirts. She'd found a pile of them in the washroom, all in desperate need of repair. When Crow entered and saw her, he immediately turned to leave. Stop, Clara said sharply. He froze. We need to talk, Clara continued, setting down her needle. Sit. I don't... Sit down, Ethan. It was the first time she'd used his given name. He went very still, then slowly turned to face her. Even in the lamplight, his expression was guarded, almost fearful. I know you don't want me here, Clara said before he could bolt. I know this whole thing is just a business arrangement for you, and I'm fine with that. But we're living in the same house, and you treating me like I'm about to attack you at any moment is ridiculous. I'm not... You ran out of the barn when I walked in, Clara interrupted. You won't stay in the same room as me for more than 30 seconds. You act like I'm dangerous. Crow's hands, still gloved, clenched into fists at his sides. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. I can't. Why not? Because... He stopped abruptly, jaw working, then quieter. Because you'll leave. Clara blinked. What? If I explain, you'll understand why people are afraid of me, and you'll leave. Crow's voice was flat, resigned. The arrangement states I'll give you travel funds if you choose to go. So if that's what you're working toward, just say so now. Don't make me... I'm not trying to leave, Clara said, cutting through his spiral. I'm trying to understand the man I married. You don't want to understand me. Stop telling me what I want." They stared at each other across the kitchen, tension thick enough to choke on. Clara refused to back down, and slowly she saw something in Crow's posture shift. Not surrender exactly, more like exhaustion. "I'm not a good man," he said finally. "I've done things, bad things, and there's something wrong with me, something I can't control, and if you get too close—" "What?" Clara pressed. "You'll hurt me? Is that what you're afraid of?" "Yes." The admission hung in the air. Crow looked away, shoulders hunched like he was bracing for her to run screaming. Clara took a slow breath. "Have you hurt anyone here? On this ranch?" "No." "Have you hurt anyone since you bought this place?" "No," Crow said again, but his voice was strained. "But that doesn't mean I won't. I lose control sometimes. When I'm angry or scared or it doesn't matter, I just do. And when that happens—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "You need to stay away from me." Clara considered him. This man who wore gloves in his own home, who avoided human contact like it was lethal, who'd married a stranger just to prove to a bank that he was stable. "I'm not afraid of you," she said quietly. Crow's head snapped up. "You should be." "Maybe, but I'm not." Clara stood, crossing the small kitchen until she was only a few feet away, close enough to see the tension in every line of his body. "I've been afraid my whole life, Ethan. Afraid of being poor, of being alone, of not surviving the next winter. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being scared." "Clara, you want me to keep my distance, I'll keep my distance," she continued. "But I'm not going to tiptoe around you like you're a loaded gun. We're married. We live together. And I'm staying." For a long moment, Crow just stared at her, something raw and desperate flickering across his face. Then he turned abruptly and left the kitchen, his boots heavy on the stairs. Clara stood alone, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just made things better or worse. After that night, something shifted. Crow still kept his distance, but he stopped fleeing rooms when Clara entered them. He started staying for meals, though he sat at the far end of the table and ate quickly, like he might need to escape at any moment. He answered when Clara spoke to him, short responses but not dismissive, and Clara started noticing things. The way Crow's hands trembled sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. The careful, deliberate way he moved, like he was constantly monitoring his own body. The dark circles under his eyes that suggested he barely slept. And the gloves. Always the gloves. She started finding them around the house, draped over chair backs, forgotten on windowsills, tucked into coat pockets. They were worn, the leather cracked and stained. Crow went through them quickly, like he couldn't stand to wear the same pair for long. One afternoon, Clara was cleaning the main room when she found a pair near the fireplace. She picked them up, meaning to set them aside, and noticed something odd. The fingertips were singed, small burn marks dotting the leather. She was still examining them when Crow came in from outside. He froze when he saw what she was holding. "Those are mine," he said quickly. "I know, I was just—" Clara turned the gloves over. "What happened to them?" "Nothing. Give them here." She handed them over, watching his face. "Ethan, what burned them?" "Doesn't matter." He shoved the gloves into his pocket, not meeting her eyes. "It does if it's going to burn down the house." "It won't." Crow's voice was tight. "I'm careful." "Careful about what?" "Clara, drop it." "I'm not trying to pry, I just—" "Drop it." The words came out harsh, almost desperate. Crow backed toward the door, one hand pressed against his chest like something hurt. "Please. Just leave it alone." He was gone before Clara could respond, disappearing into the fading afternoon light. That night, Clara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart hammering, scanning the darkness for flames. Nothing. The room was dark and cold, no fire in sight. But the smell was there, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the floorboards. Clara grabbed her robe and hurried downstairs. The main room was empty, the fireplace cold. Kitchen? Nothing. She followed the smell to the back door, which stood slightly ajar, and stepped out into the yard. Crow was there. He stood about 30 feet from the house, near the barn, his back to her. He'd shed his coat and shirt despite the cold, standing in just his trousers and boots. And even in the darkness, Clara could see it. Light. Faint, pulsing light traced across his skin, following patterns she couldn't quite make out. It glowed soft and golden, like embers beneath his flesh, concentrating along his arms and back. As Clara watched, the light flared brighter, and Crow's whole body went rigid. He made a sound, low, pained, and the light surged. For a split second, Clara saw the full pattern, intricate lines and symbols covering his skin like a map written in fire. Then Crow dropped to his knees, gasping, and the light faded. Clara stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just witnessed. Her mind kept trying to rationalize it, reflection, trick of moonlight, fever dream, but she knew what she'd seen. Crow stayed on the ground for a long moment, head bowed, breathing hard. Then he slowly reached for his shirt and pulled it back on with shaking hands. When he finally stood and turned toward the house, he saw Clara standing in the doorway. They stared at each other across the dark yard. "You should go inside," Crow said hoarsely. Clara didn't move. "What was that?" "Nothing. Go back to bed." "That wasn't nothing, Ethan. There was light. I said go inside." The words cracked through the night like a whip. Crow's hands clenched into fists, and for an instant Clara saw the glow beneath his skin again, angry red this time. He saw her notice and turned away sharply. "Please, just go." Clara hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run. This was it, the thing everyone had warned her about, the reason Crow isolated himself. Whatever was happening to him wasn't natural, wasn't human. She should be terrified. Instead, she walked toward him. "Clara, no." Crow backed away, holding up his hands. "Stay back. I can't control it when what?" She kept approaching, slow and steady. "When you're upset? Scared? When I'm anything." His voice broke. "It doesn't matter what I feel. It just happens, and I can't stop it. That's why you need to stay away from me. That's why everyone—" He stopped abruptly, swaying slightly. Clara realized he looked exhausted, pushed past some invisible limit. "How long have you been dealing with this?" she asked softly. Crow shook his head. 10 years since—" He cut himself off. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter. Ethan, if you're sick or cursed or—" "I'm not sick." The words came out bitter. "I'm marked, changed, and there's no fixing it. I've tried everything, doctors, healers, even a damn exorcist once. Nothing works. This is just what I am now." Clara absorbed that. The man in front of her, proud and broken and trying so hard to maintain control, suddenly made more sense. The isolation, the fear, the gloves. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Crow blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "What?" "When the light comes. Does it hurt?" He stared at her for a long moment, then quietly, "Yes." Clara's chest tightened. "Come inside, you're freezing." "Clara, come inside," she repeated more firmly this time. "We'll make tea. You'll warm up, and if you want to talk about it, we will. If you don't, we won't. But you're not staying out here all night." Crow looked like he wanted to argue, but whatever reserves he'd been running on were clearly depleted because after a moment, he just nodded. They walked back to the house together, maintaining careful distance. Clara put the kettle on while Crow sank into a chair at the kitchen table, looking hollowed out. She made 2 cups of strong tea, added honey to both, and set one in front of him. Crow wrapped his gloved hands around the cup, soaking in the warmth. "You're not going to ask questions?" "Do you want me to?" "No." He paused. "Maybe. I don't know." Clara sipped her tea, giving him space to decide. Outside, wind rattled the windows, the only sound in the quiet kitchen. Finally, Crow spoke. "It happened during the war. I was with a Confederate unit, but we were, unconventional. They called us guerrillas, raiders. We hit supply lines, burned Union camps, did whatever we could to slow them down." His voice was distant, remembering. "We were good at it. Too good, maybe. The Union started sending special units after us, soldiers who'd been given something, some kind of edge." "Edge," Clara prompted when he fell silent. "I don't know what it was. Some kind of alchemy or science or dark magic, I don't know. But these soldiers were faster, stronger, harder to kill, and they had marks on their bodies, like mine, glowing symbols that gave them power." Crow's jaw tightened. We captured one eventually, tried to interrogate him, figure out what had been done to him. He wouldn't talk, but one of my commanders got creative. Clara stayed quiet, sensing where this was going. He used the captured soldier as bait, Crow continued, set a trap. And when the other marked soldiers came to rescue their man, we ambushed them, killed most of them. But one survived long enough to... He stopped, swallowing hard. He touched me, just grabbed my arm before he died. And I felt something transfer, felt it burn into my skin, into my bones. By the time the medics got to me, I had the marks, and the power that came with them. What kind of power? Crow's hands tightened around his cup. I can stop things. Projectiles, animals, people. If they're moving toward me, I can freeze them in place, and I can push, like an invisible wall, strong enough to break bones. He met Clara's eyes. Strong enough to kill. Clara processed that. The Red Hollow Massacre. People think you... I know what they think. Crow's voice was flat. And they're wrong. I wasn't there. But the man who touched me, who gave me these marks, he had been at Red Hollow, so people assume I'm the same, that I'm a killer. Are you? The question hung between them. Crow held her gaze, something haunted in his expression. I've killed, he said quietly. In the war. In self-defense. But I've never massacred innocents. I've never... His voice cracked. I'm not a monster, Clara. But I could be. That's what terrifies me. Every time I lose control, every time the power surges, I'm afraid I'll become the thing everyone thinks I already am. Clara set down her cup. You're not a monster. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She leaned forward slightly. A monster wouldn't care about control, wouldn't isolate himself to protect others, wouldn't warn his new wife to stay away for her own safety. She held his gaze. You're afraid of yourself, Ethan, but fear doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you careful. Crow looked at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. You should still keep your distance. I will if you need me to, Clara agreed, but not because I'm afraid, because you asked. Something in Crow's expression cracked, just slightly. He looked away, blinking hard, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. Why are you being kind to me? Because everyone else isn't, Clara said simply, and because you deserve it. They sat in silence for a while, drinking tea while the night deepened around them. Eventually, Crow stood, moving slowly like his body ached. I should let you sleep, he said. Will you be all right? He paused at the doorway, glancing back. I don't know, but I'm used to it. Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Clara sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle, and realized something had changed tonight. The wall between her and Ethan had cracked. Not broken, not yet, but cracked. And Clara had no intention of letting it rebuild. The next morning, Clara woke to find Ethan already gone. His bedroom door stood open, bed roughly made, no sign of him anywhere in the house. She might have worried, except for the fresh firewood stacked by the hearth, and the coffee pot still warm on the stove. He'd been here. He just didn't want to face her. Clara couldn't entirely blame him. Last night had stripped away whatever pretense existed between them, left them both raw and exposed. The man she'd married had literally glowed in the darkness, had confessed to carrying marks that gave him power he couldn't control, had admitted he was terrified of becoming a monster. That kind of vulnerability didn't just disappear with sunrise. She poured herself coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the empty yard. The sky was overcast, promising rain. In the distance, she could see Ethan near the cattle pen, working on a broken fence post. Even from here, she could tell he was moving stiffly, like his body hurt. Clara made breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits, and set aside a plate for him. Then she started on the day's chores, giving him the space he clearly needed. But space didn't mean silence. Over the next few days, Clara began testing the boundaries of their arrangement. She didn't push for conversation or force proximity, but she stopped treating the house like it belonged to Ethan alone. She hummed while she worked, left books open on the table, asked simple questions when they crossed paths. Do you need more coffee? Should I mend that shirt? Is the barn door sticking? Questions that required answers, not just nods. Ethan responded cautiously at first, single words and brief replies. But gradually, incrementally, he started staying in rooms with her for longer stretches, started answering with full sentences. Once, he even almost smiled when Clara made a dry comment about the chickens being more cooperative than most people she'd known. The gloves stayed on. The distance remained. But the wall between them continued to crack. A week after the night in the yard, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats. She turned to see a rider approaching, a weathered man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard, riding a bay mare. He reined in near the house, tipping his hat. "Ma'am, name's Dodge. I work for Mr. Crow." Clara recognized the name, the ranch hand who handled town business. "I'm Clara, his wife." Dodge's eyebrows rose slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Pleasure to meet you. Is Ethan around?" "In the barn, I think." "Much obliged." He started to dismount, then hesitated. "Mrs. Crow, can I ask you something?" Clara waited. "How's he doing? Ethan, I mean. He tell you anything about how things are?" "He's told me some things," Clara said carefully. Dodge nodded slowly, studying her face. "And you're still here." "I'm still here." "That's good." The old man's expression softened. "Real good. He needs someone. Been alone out here too long, locked up in his own head. Man can't live like that forever." Before Clara could respond, Ethan emerged from the barn, stopping short when he saw Dodge. Even from across the yard, Clara could see his posture stiffen. "Didn't know you were coming," Ethan called out. "Last minute run to town," Dodge replied easily, swinging down from his horse. "Thought I'd check in, see if you need anything." Ethan walked over, keeping his gloved hands tucked into his coat pockets. "We're fine." "Good, good." Dodge glanced at Clara, then back to Ethan. "Actually, there's something we should discuss. Private-like." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The two men walked toward the barn, voices dropping too low for Clara to hear. She watched them go, unease settling in her stomach. Something about Dodge's tone had been off, casual on the surface, but with an undercurrent of tension. They were in the barn for nearly an hour. When they finally emerged, Ethan's face was grim, all the fragile progress of the past week erased. Dodge looked troubled too, though he forced a smile when he saw Clara watching from the porch. "Mrs. Crow," he called out, "you take care now." He rode off before Clara could respond, leaving Ethan standing alone in the yard, staring at nothing. Clara descended the porch steps. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Ethan, I said it's nothing." He turned away sharply, heading for the house. "I have work to do." He disappeared inside, and a moment later Clara heard his bedroom door slam. She stood in the yard, frustration and worry warring in her chest. Whatever Dodge had told him, it wasn't nothing, and Ethan's walls had just slammed back into place. That evening, Ethan didn't come down for dinner. Clara left a plate outside his door, listening to the heavy silence from within. The next morning, the plate was gone, but Ethan wasn't at breakfast. She found him outside before dawn, already working, moving with a furious energy that looked like he was trying to outrun something. "We need to talk," Clara said, crossing the yard toward him. "Busy." "Make time." Ethan didn't look at her, just kept hammering at the fence post he was repairing. "There's nothing to talk about." "Then why are you hiding from me?" The hammer came down hard, missing the nail and striking wood. Ethan swore, throwing the tool aside. "I'm not hiding. I'm working." "You're avoiding me," Clara corrected. "Whatever Dodge said has nothing to do with you." "We're married, Ethan. Everything has to do with me now." He finally looked at her, and Clara caught her breath at the expression on his face. Fear. Raw, barely contained fear. "There's talk in town," he said flatly. "About me. About us. People are saying things, and Dodge wanted me to know before it got worse." "What kind of things?" Ethan's hands clenched. "That I'm dangerous. That you're in danger. Some folks are saying I forced you to marry me, that I'm keeping you prisoner out here." His voice turned bitter. "A few are even suggesting someone should come check on you. Make sure you're safe." Clara's stomach sank. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Ethan turned away, staring out at the empty land. "You married a man everyone's afraid of. Came out to live in isolation with someone who could hurt you without even meaning to. From their perspective, you're either crazy or coerced. I chose this, Clara said firmly. I chose you. You chose survival, Ethan corrected. There's a difference. The words stung, partly because there was truth in them. Clara had married Ethan to escape destitution, but in the weeks since, something had shifted. She'd started to see past the fear and the marks and the desperate control, started to see the man beneath. What do you want me to do? She asked quietly. Go to town and tell everyone I'm fine? Write a letter? I'll do it if it helps. It won't help. Ethan's voice was tired. People believe what they want to believe. They've decided I'm a monster, and nothing I do will change that. Having a wife just gives them something else to worry about. So we do nothing? We keep our heads down and hope they lose interest. He glanced at her. And you stay away from town. The last thing we need is you trying to defend me and making everything worse. Clara bristled. I'm not going to hide. Yes, you are. Ethan's tone left no room for argument. This is my problem, Clara, not yours, and I won't have you getting caught up in it. Too late. I'm already caught up in it. They stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, Ethan shook his head and walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the cold morning air. The rest of the day passed in strained silence. Ethan threw himself into work with an intensity that looked painful, repairing fences and hauling feed and fixing things that didn't really need fixing. Clara stayed inside, anger and helplessness churning through her. She wanted to help, to fix this somehow, but Ethan had made it clear he didn't want her involvement. That night, a storm rolled in. Clara woke to thunder rattling the windows and rain hammering the roof. She lay in bed listening to the wind howl, wondering if Ethan was awake too, if he was pacing his room like he sometimes did when sleep wouldn't come. Then she heard something else. A crash from downstairs, followed by the sharp sound of breaking glass. Clara grabbed her robe and hurried down the stairs. The main room was dark, except for flashes of lightning through the windows. Another crash came from the kitchen, and Clara rushed toward it. Ethan was on his knees in the middle of the floor, surrounded by broken dishes. His coat and shirt were off, and in the lightning flashes, Clara could see the marks covering his skin, glowing bright, pulsing with each crack of thunder. His hands were pressed against his chest, and he was breathing in short, harsh gasps. Ethan, stay back! The words came out strangled. Clara, don't... Lightning struck close, illuminating the room in stark white light. The marks on Ethan's body flared brilliant gold, and he cried out. Every dish still on the shelves flew off, shattering against the walls. The table shuddered, the window cracked. Clara understood suddenly. The storm was triggering the marks, the power surging beyond his control. Tell me what to do, she said, keeping her voice steady. Get out. Ethan's whole body was shaking. Go upstairs. Lock your door. I'm not leaving you like this. Clara, please. Another lightning strike, another surge. The kitchen door blew open, wind and rain pouring in. Ethan doubled over, gasping. I can't stop it. I can't. Clara made a decision. She crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps and dropped to her knees in front of him, reaching for his hands. Ethan jerked back. Don't touch me. If the marks activate while you're... I don't care. Clara grabbed his wrists, pulling his hands away from his chest. His skin was burning hot beneath the gloves, the marks underneath pulsing so brightly she could see them through the leather. Let go, Ethan choked out. Clara, let go. No. She tightened her grip, meeting his wild eyes. Listen to me. You're afraid of hurting me. I understand that, but right now you're hurting yourself, and I'm not going to sit by and watch. You don't understand what these marks can do. Then show me. Lightning struck again, so close the house shook. The power surged through Ethan's body, the marks blazing white hot. Clara felt it through the gloves, a shock of heat that should have burned her, should have thrown her back. But instead, something else happened. The marks flickered, dimmed slightly, as if Clara's touch was grounding them somehow, bleeding off the excess energy. Ethan stared at her, shock cutting through the pain. What? How? I don't know. Kept holding on even as her palms began to sting. But it's working. Just breathe. Clara, your hands are fine. Breathe. They stayed like that through the worst of the storm, Clara anchoring Ethan while the marks slowly, painfully subsided. Each lightning strike made them flare, but never as violently as before, and gradually the glow faded from brilliant white to gold to a faint shimmer beneath his skin. When the storm finally passed, leaving only rain pattering on the roof, Ethan was exhausted and shaking. Clara's hands were red and tender where she'd held on to him, but not burned, not damaged. "You shouldn't have done that," Ethan said hoarsely. "You could have been hurt." "But I wasn't." Clara released his wrists carefully. "And neither were you. Not as badly as you would have been alone." Ethan looked down at his hands, still gloved, then back at Clara. "I don't understand. No one's ever been able to touch me during a surge without getting hurt. The marks should have burned you." "Maybe they tried." Clara flexed her sore hands. "But I'm stubborn." A sound escaped Ethan, half laugh, half sob. He closed his eyes, shoulders sagging. "You're insane." "Probably." They sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by broken dishes while rain drummed overhead. Eventually Clara stood and offered Ethan a hand up. He hesitated, then took it, letting her help him to his feet. "We should clean this up," Clara said, surveying the damage. "I'll do it. You should rest. We'll do it together." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too tired. They worked in silence, sweeping up broken ceramic and mopping up rainwater from the blown-open door. At some point, Ethan pulled his shirt back on, hiding the marks, but his movements were slow and careful. When they finished, dawn was breaking outside, pale gray light filtering through the clouds. Clara made coffee while Ethan sank into a chair, looking hollowed out. "This is why I stay alone," he said quietly. "The marks don't just respond to emotion. Storms trigger them. Loud noises, bright lights. Sometimes nothing at all, just random surges I can't predict. Living with someone else means exposing them to that risk." Clara set a cup of coffee in front of him. "And living alone means going through that risk by yourself. Which is worse? At least alone I only hurt myself." "You're not hurting me, Ethan. Not yet." He wrapped his hands around the cup, not looking at her. "But I will eventually. The marks always find a way." "Then we'll deal with it when it happens," Clara said simply. "Together." Ethan finally looked up, something desperate and confused in his expression. "Why? Why are you so determined to stay? You could leave. I'd give you money, help you start somewhere new. Why stay with someone who's this broken?" Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Because I'm broken too, Ethan. Maybe not in the same way, but I am. I've spent my whole life running from things, poverty, loneliness, fear. I'm tired of running. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm somewhere I can actually stand still. This ranch? This ranch, this life." She paused. "You." Ethan's breath caught. He stared at her like she'd said something impossible. "I'm not asking for love," Claire continued. "I'm not asking for anything you can't give. But I need you to stop trying to push me away for my own protection. I'm a grown woman. I can make my own choices, and I'm choosing to stay." For a long moment, Ethan didn't respond. Then, so quietly, she almost missed it. "I don't deserve you." "That's not your decision to make." Something in Ethan's expression cracked. He looked away, jaw working, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. "When the marks first appeared, I tried everything to get rid of them. Spent every cent I had on doctors and healers. One of them told me the marks weren't just power. He said they were a curse designed to isolate people, make them dangerous to be around so they drive everyone away." He met Clara's eyes. "What if he was right? What if that's what's happening here? The marks using me to hurt you?" "The marks didn't make you marry me," Clara pointed out. "You chose that. And the marks didn't make me answer your notice. I chose that too. Whatever happens between us, it's our choice. Not some curse." Ethan absorbed that, looking like he wanted desperately to believe her. "You're too stubborn for your own good." "Someone has to be." This time, when that almost smile crossed his face, it actually reached his eyes. They sat together in the kitchen as full morning broke outside, drinking coffee and not talking. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt like something settling into place, puzzle pieces finding their fit. Eventually, Ethan stood. "I should see to the cattle, make sure the storm didn't damage the pens." "I'll make breakfast." He nodded, pulling on his coat. At the door, he paused. "Clara?" "Yes?" Thank you for last night, for... He trailed off, searching for words. For not running. Clara met his gaze steadily. I'm not going to run, Ethan. You're stuck with me. He left before she could see his expression, but Clara thought she heard relief in the quiet sound he made as the door closed. The days after the storm brought a subtle shift to the ranch. Ethan still kept his gloves on, still maintained physical distance, but the desperate edge to his isolation had dulled. He started staying for full meals, sitting across from Clara, and actually engaging in conversation. Nothing deep, talk about the cattle, the weather, repairs that needed doing, but real dialogue instead of clipped responses. Clara learned things about him. He'd grown up in Missouri, left home at 16 to join the war. His parents were dead, killed by cholera before the fighting even started. He'd taught himself to read using stolen books, could do complex mathematics in his head, had a dry sense of humor that caught Clara off guard when it emerged. And she told him things about herself. Her childhood in Kentucky, the way her father had drunk himself to death and left her mother to raise 5 children alone. Her first husband, Thomas, good but passive, content to drift through life without ambition. The way she'd felt invisible in Abilene, another poor widow everyone pitied but no one helped. You're not invisible here, Ethan said one evening over dinner. Clara looked up from her plate. What? You said you felt invisible in town. You're not invisible here. He met her eyes briefly before looking away. I see you. It was a small thing, simple words, but something in Clara's chest tightened anyway. 2 weeks after the storm, Dodge returned. This time, he looked genuinely worried. We've got a problem, he said without preamble, barely waiting for Ethan to invite him inside. Marshal's coming. Ethan went very still. What marshal? Federal one. Name's Rourke. He's been making inquiries in town about you, asking questions about the ranch, about Mrs. Crow, about your past. Dodge glanced at Clara. Specifically asking about Red Hollow. The name hung in the air like a blade. Clara saw Ethan's hands clench, saw the careful control slip over his features. What did people tell him? Ethan asked, his voice flat. The truth. That you bought this place years ago, keep to yourself, haven't caused trouble. But Rourke's not interested in the truth. Dodge's expression darkened. He's convinced you're the one who massacred that settlement. Says he's got evidence. That's impossible, Clara said sharply. Ethan told me he wasn't there. I know, ma'am, but Rourke's got a witness, someone claiming they saw the marked one at Red Hollow. Dodge looked at Ethan grimly. He's coming to arrest you, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. And he's bringing a posse. Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. She looked at Ethan, expecting anger or fear. Instead, she saw resignation. How many men? Ethan asked quietly. 6, maybe 8. All armed. Dodge leaned forward. Ethan, you need to run. Get out of here tonight. Head for Mexico. I'll help Mrs. Crow. No. Ethan's voice was firm. I'm not running. You can't fight them, Dodge insisted. Even if you use the marks, even if you... I'm not fighting them either. Ethan met Clara's eyes across the room. I'm done running, done hiding. If Rourke wants to arrest me, he can try. But I'm not abandoning my home. They'll kill you, Dodge said bluntly. Marshal or no marshal, the second you resist, they'll put you down. You know how people are about the marked ones. Then I won't resist. Clara stood abruptly. Absolutely not. You're not just surrendering to people who want you dead. What choice do I have? Ethan's voice was tired. Fight and prove everyone right about me being dangerous? Run and look guilty? Or stay and face whatever comes? You have the choice to defend yourself, Clara argued, to tell your side of the story. My side doesn't matter, it never has. Ethan turned to Dodge. How long do I have? Day? Maybe 2. Then we wait. Dodge looked between them, clearly frustrated, but he nodded. I'll keep my ear to the ground, let you know when they're moving, just be ready. After Dodge left, Clara rounded on Ethan. You can't just give up. I'm not giving up. I'm accepting reality. He pulled off one glove, revealing the faint glow of marks beneath his skin. Look at me, Clara. I'm marked. Everyone knows what that means. Even if I'm innocent, even if I prove I wasn't at Red Hollow, I'll always be dangerous in their eyes, always be something to fear. So you'll let them take you, execute you. If that's what it takes to keep you safe, don't. Clara's voice cracked. Don't you dare sacrifice yourself for me. Ethan stared at her, something raw in his expression. What else am I supposed to do? Fight, Clara said fiercely. Not with the marks, not with violence, but fight. Tell the truth, make them listen. They won't listen. Then make them. They stood facing each other in the dim light of the main room, the weight of the approaching confrontation pressing down on them both. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Clara. It was the first time he'd admitted it out loud, the first time he'd let the mask slip completely. Clara crossed the room and took his bare hand in both of hers, ignoring the heat from the marks. So am I. But we'll face it together. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, at the way Clara's fingers wrapped around his glowing marks without flinching. When he looked back up, there were tears in his eyes. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Don't know how to let someone stand with me. You don't have to know, Clara said softly. You just have to let me. They stayed like that while darkness fell outside, holding on to each other like anchors in a storm, knowing that everything was about to change. They came at noon the next day, just as the sun reached its highest point and shadows vanished into sharp angles beneath boots and hooves. Clara saw them first from the kitchen window, 8 riders moving in a loose formation across the scrubland, dust rising behind them like smoke. At the center rode a man in a dark coat with a silver star pinned to his chest, his posture rigid with purpose. She dropped the plate she'd been washing. It shattered against the floor. Ethan! He was already coming down the stairs, moving fast. He must have been watching from the upstairs window. When he reached the main room, his face was set in hard lines, but Clara could see the tremor in his hands as he pulled on his gloves. Stay inside, he said. Like hell. Clara, I'm your wife. She stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the door. That means I stand with you, not behind you. Ethan's jaw worked. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. If shooting starts then we'll both get down, together. Clara grabbed his arm. But I'm not hiding while they take you. For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then something shifted in his expression, not surrender, but acceptance. He nodded once, sharp, and moved toward the door. They stepped out onto the porch together as the riders reined up in the yard. Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, his whole body coiled tight. The marks beneath his clothes must be reacting, responding to the threat. She could almost feel the heat radiating off him. The man with the star dismounted first. He was tall, lean, somewhere in his 50s, with iron gray hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His eyes swept over the ranch, the house, lingering on Ethan with cold assessment. Ethan Crow? His voice carried across the yard, flat and official. That's me. I'm Marshal Thomas Rourke, federal appointee. I'm here to place you under arrest for the massacre at Red Hollow Settlement, June 1865. Murder of 43 men, women, and children. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Behind Rourke, the other men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. Clara recognized a few faces from town, the blacksmith, a store clerk, men who'd probably never fired a gun in anger but were here anyway, deputized and dangerous. I wasn't at Red Hollow, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tension vibrating through his frame. That's not what my witness says. Rourke pulled a folded paper from his coat. I have a signed statement from a survivor. He identified you by description, tall, dark hair, wearing Confederate gray, and by the marks. Rourke's gaze sharpened. He said the killer had glowing symbols on his skin, said he watched you tear through that settlement like something out of hell. Your witness is lying. Maybe, maybe not. Rourke refolded the paper. Either way, you're coming with me. We'll sort it out in front of a judge. Clara stepped forward. What proof do you have? One statement from someone who supposedly survived a massacre but waited 10 years to come forward? Rourke's attention shifted to her, his expression neutral but calculating. Mrs. Crow, I presume. I'd advise you to step aside. This doesn't concern you. He's my husband. It concerns me. Then you should know what he is. Rourke's voice dropped, taking on an edge of menace. He's marked, transformed, one of those weapons the war created and couldn't control. Men like him are dangerous, ma'am. Unstable. The fact that he's kept you out here, isolated, should tell you everything you need to know. The only thing it tells me is that he wanted privacy, Clara shot back. That's not a crime. Murder is. Rourke took a step forward, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Now I can do this easy or hard. Easy means Crow comes peacefully, gets his day in court. Hard means we take him by force, and someone gets hurt. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. Clara could see the glow starting to seep through the leather of his gloves, faint but growing. The marks were activating, responding to the threat, the confrontation. In another moment, they'd be visible to everyone. Don't, Clara whispered urgently. Ethan, don't use them. He's not giving me a choice. There's always a choice. Behind Rourke, one of the deputies muttered something. Another nodded, rifle shifting in his grip. They were getting nervous, sensing violence coming. Clara could feel the moment crystallizing, hardening into inevitability. She made a split-second decision and stepped off the porch, putting herself between Ethan and the marshal. Clara, get back here. No. She faced Rourke directly. You want to arrest him? Fine, but I'm coming too. As his wife, I have the right to accompany him and testify on his behalf. Rourke's eyes narrowed. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not negotiating. I'm stating facts. Clara lifted her chin. You take him, you take me. Otherwise, you're separating a married couple without cause, and I'll make sure every newspaper between here and Washington knows about it. It was a bluff. Clara had no connections to newspapers, no leverage at all. But Rourke didn't know that. She saw calculation flicker across his face, weighing the complications. Fine, he said finally. You can ride along. But any trouble from either of you, and the arrangement ends. Understood? Clara nodded. Behind her, she heard Ethan make a low sound of protest. Clara, you can't. I can and I will. She turned to face him. We do this together, remember? Ethan stared at her, something desperate and grateful warring in his expression. Then he looked past her to Rourke. I'll come, but she rides beside me, not tied or restrained. She's not under arrest, Rourke said. She can ride however she wants, but you... He gestured, and two deputies dismounted, pulling rope from their saddlebags. You get restrained, hands in front so you can hold reins, but tied tight. Ethan descended the porch steps slowly, each movement deliberate. The deputies approached cautiously, clearly afraid despite their numbers. When they reached for his hands, Ethan pulled off his gloves himself, revealing the marks fully. The reaction was immediate. Both deputies jerked back, one reaching for his gun. The marks glowed soft gold in the daylight, intricate patterns covering Ethan's hands and wrists, pulsing with each heartbeat. Sweet mercy, one deputy breathed. It's true, the other whispered. He really is marked. Tie him, Rourke ordered sharply. Now! The deputies moved forward again, more carefully this time, looping rope around Ethan's wrists. The moment the rope touched his skin, the marks flared brighter. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he didn't resist. Didn't move except for the slight tremor that ran through his frame. Clara watched, helpless, as they bound him. When they finished, Rourke inspected the knots himself, then nodded. Get him on a horse. Mrs. Crow, you'll ride the mare. They brought horses forward, a sturdy gelding for Ethan, a smaller mare for Clara. Ethan mounted awkwardly with bound hands, settling into the saddle with visible effort. Clara climbed onto the mare, positioning herself beside him. Ethan, she said quietly. He looked at her, and she saw the fear he'd been holding back. Not fear of Rourke or the deputies or even the trial. Fear that he'd lose control, that the marks would activate and prove every terrible thing people believed about him. Look at me, Clara said. Just keep looking at me. Nothing else matters. Ethan held her gaze like it was a lifeline. Rourke mounted his own horse and gestured forward. Let's move. We've got a long ride to Fort Davis. The journey took 3 days. They traveled southwest across harsh terrain, camping each night in makeshift sites with minimal shelter. Rourke kept Ethan separated from the main group, positioning guards around him at all times. Clara stayed as close as they'd allow, sleeping near enough to hear if anything went wrong. Ethan barely spoke. The marks stayed active the entire time, glowing faintly beneath his shirt, responding to stress and exhaustion. At night, when he thought no one was watching, Clara saw him struggle with surges, the marks flaring bright, his body going rigid as he fought to contain the power. Each time she wanted to go to him, to anchor him like she had during the storm, but the guards wouldn't allow it. On the second night, one of the deputies, a young man named Carson, approached Clara while she sat by the fire. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Clara looked up warily. "What? Why'd you marry him?" Carson gestured toward where Ethan sat bound and isolated. "Everyone in Sunset Ridge said you came from nowhere, answered his notice like you were desperate. But you don't seem desperate. You seem—" He searched for words. "You seem like you chose this." "I did choose it." "Why?" Clara considered the question. Around them, the camp was settling for the night, men bedding down, horses hobbled, the fire crackling low. Ethan sat maybe 20 feet away, head bowed, looking utterly alone. "Because he needed someone who wouldn't run," Clara said finally. "And I needed somewhere I could stop running." Carson absorbed that. "You know what they say about him, right? About what he did?" "I know what they say. I also know what's true." Clara met his eyes. "Your marshal has one witness, one man who supposedly survived a massacre and took a decade to speak up. That's not evidence. That's revenge or profit or fear, maybe all three." "The marks are not a crime," Clara interrupted. "Being marked doesn't make someone a killer. It makes them different. Powerful, yes. Dangerous, maybe. But not automatically guilty." Carson looked uncomfortable. "Marshall seems pretty sure." "Marshall wants a conviction. There's a difference between wanting something and being right about it." The young deputy stood, clearly done with the conversation. "Get some rest, ma'am. Long ride tomorrow." Clara watched him walk away, then turned her attention back to Ethan. His head was still bowed, but she thought she saw his shoulders shift slightly, awareness that she was watching. She wished she could cross the distance between them, wished she could hold his hand and remind him he wasn't alone. Instead, she wrapped her blanket tighter and kept vigil through the night. They reached Fort Davis on the third day. It wasn't much, a military outpost that had been converted to a territorial courthouse after the war, surrounded by adobe walls and a scatter of buildings. A tired-looking flag hung from a pole in the center yard. Rourke led them through the main gate, past curious soldiers and civilians who stopped to stare. Word had clearly spread that the marshal was bringing in someone marked. By the time they reached the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. "Murder!" someone shouted. "Hang him!" another voice called. Clara saw Ethan's expression shut down completely, going blank and distant. The marks beneath his shirt pulsed bright enough to see through the fabric. They were taken inside. Ethan to a cell in the back, Clara to a small room that served as waiting area. Before they separated, Ethan looked at her one last time. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming this far." "It's not over," Clara replied. "We'll get through this." She wasn't sure she believed it, but she needed him to. Then the guards took him away, and Clara was left alone with nothing but fear and fury churning in her chest. The trial was scheduled for 2 days later. In that time, Clara tried everything to see Ethan, argued with guards, appealed to Rourke, even attempted to bribe her way in. Nothing worked. She was allowed brief supervised visits, 5 minutes each, where she and Ethan sat on opposite sides of a barred door and tried to communicate through metal and fear. "Have you seen a lawyer?" Clara asked during one visit. "There isn't one. Fort Davis doesn't have a proper court. This is all frontier justice." Ethan's voice was flat. "Rourke will present his evidence, I'll tell my side, and a panel of local officials will decide." "That's not a trial. That's an execution waiting to happen." "I know." Clara pressed her face close to the bars. "Tell me about Red Hollow. What actually happened there?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then, "I don't know. I wasn't there. By June 1865, I'd already left my unit. The marks had just appeared and I was losing control. I went into the mountains, tried to figure out what was happening to me. When I finally came back to civilization months later, I heard about Red Hollow, heard they were blaming a marked soldier." "But you'd been seen with your unit before that. They knew you were marked." Exactly. So when the massacre happened and witnesses described a marked killer, everyone assumed it was me." Ethan's hands gripped the bars. There were other marked soldiers, Clara. At least a dozen that I knew of. But I was the only one from a Confederate unit in that region. Easy target. The witness Rourke is lying. Has to be. Either he didn't actually see who killed those people, or he's being paid to identify me specifically. Clara absorbed that. We need to find the real killer. Prove it wasn't you. How? It's been 10 years. Even if the real killer is still alive, how would we find them? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. The guard called time, and Clara was forced to leave. She walked out into the harsh afternoon sun, mind racing. There had to be something she could do, some way to prove Ethan's innocence. But she was one woman with no resources, no connections, no power. She was still trying to figure out a plan when Dodge found her. The old ranch hand looked haggard, like he'd ridden hard to get here. He pulled Clara aside, away from curious ears. I brought something, he said, keeping his voice low. Information. About Red Hollow. Clara's heart jumped. What kind of information? The kind that might save Ethan's life. Dodge glanced around nervously. But we need to move fast. The trial's in 2 days, and if Rourke gets wind of this, he'll bury it. Tell me. Dodge reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed with age. This came to the ranch about 6 months ago. Ethan never opened it. He doesn't get much mail, and he figured it was just another person trying to scare him off. But I kept it. Something about it felt off. Clara took the letter, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, the words urgent. Mr. Crow, you don't know me, but I know what you are. I know about Red Hollow, and I know you're innocent. The real killer is still out there, and he's killed again. 3 settlements in Colorado, same marks left behind, same glow in the dark. If you want the truth, come to Silverton. Find Victor Marsh. He knows everything. He was there. The letter was unsigned and undated, but the postmark was clear. 6 months ago, from Silverton, Colorado. Clara looked up at Dodge. Victor Marsh, do we know who that is? I've been asking around. Best I can figure, he was a Union officer during the war, worked with some kind of special unit, soldiers who dealt with the marked ones. Dodge's expression was grim. If anyone knows the truth about Red Hollow, it'd be him. We need to find him, get him here to testify. That's the problem. Silverton's a week's ride, maybe more. Even if we left right now, we wouldn't make it back before the trial. Clara's mind raced. A week. They didn't have a week. The trial was in 2 days, and without evidence, without a witness to contradict Rourke's claims, Ethan would be convicted. Executed, probably. The mob outside was already calling for it. Then we don't wait, Clara said. We go to Silverton ourselves, find Marsh, get the truth, and bring it back. You want to leave? Now? Dodge looked shocked. Mrs. Crow, the trial will happen whether I'm here or not. But if I can bring back proof of Ethan's innocence, real proof, then maybe we have a chance. Clara folded the letter carefully. I need a horse, money for supplies, and directions. Dodge stared at her. You're serious? Completely. It's dangerous. The route to Silverton goes through rough country, bandits, harsh weather, and that's assuming Marsh is even there, assuming he'll talk to you. I don't have a choice, Clara said flatly. Ethan doesn't have a choice. Either I try this, or I watch them hang him. Dodge was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, I'll get you set up. But you need to move fast, and you need to be smart about this. Rourke finds out you've left. He'll assume you're running. That'll make things worse for Ethan. Then we don't tell him until I'm already gone. They spent the next hour preparing. Dodge procured a fast horse and supplies, food, water, a bedroll, a small revolver that Clara barely knew how to use. He gave her rough directions to Silverton and described Victor Marsh as best he could. Older man, military bearing, last seen running a mining supply shop. As Clara prepared to leave, Dodge grabbed her arm. You sure about this? No, Clara admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. She managed one last visit to Ethan before she left. The guard allowed her 3 minutes. I need to tell you something, Clara said, pressing close to the bars. Ethan looked up and she saw how much the confinement was wearing on him. The marks glowed constantly now, visible through his thin shirt, pulsing with suppressed energy. There's a lead, Clara continued, about Red Hollow. Someone who might know the truth. I'm going to find them. Ethan's eyes widened. Clara, no! I don't have time to argue. The trial is in 2 days, and this is our only chance. It's too dangerous. You can't go alone. I won't be alone. Dodge is helping, and I'll be back before the trial ends, I promise. Clara, Ethan's voice cracked. Please, don't do this. Just let it happen. I'd rather hang than have you risk yourself for me. Too bad. Clara reached through the bars and took his bound hands in hers, feeling the heat from the marks. You don't get to decide what I risk. I told you. We face this together. That means I fight for you. Ethan looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. If something happens to you, it won't. But if it does, then you keep fighting. You survive this, with or without me. Promise me. Ethan shook his head, but Clara squeezed his hands harder. Promise me, Ethan. I promise, he whispered. Clara leaned forward and kissed him through the bars. It was brief, desperate, tasting of salt and fear. When she pulled back, she saw tears on Ethan's face. I'll come back, she said, with the truth. Then she turned and walked away before she could lose her nerve, before the guard could see that she was crying too. She left Fort Davis as the sun set, riding hard toward the northwest. Behind her, the fort shrank into the distance, taking Ethan with it. Ahead lay a week of dangerous travel and an uncertain hope. But Clara had made her choice. She would find Victor Marsh. She would learn the truth about Red Hollow, and she would save the man who'd become far more than a marriage of convenience. She would save her husband or die trying. The horse's hooves ate up miles of hard ground as darkness swallowed the landscape behind Clara. She pushed the mare harder than she probably should have, but every minute counted now. Ethan had 2 days before they put him in front of that makeshift court. 2 days before men who'd already decided he was guilty went through the motions of pretending justice mattered. Clara's hands ached from gripping the reins. Her back protested the pace. She ignored both and kept riding. By midnight, the mare was lathered and stumbling. Clara finally admitted defeat and found a small canyon to camp in, sheltered from the wind that had picked up across the plains. She tied the horse where it could reach sparse grass, then sat with her back against cold rock and tried not to think about Ethan locked in that cell. She failed spectacularly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face through those bars, exhausted, scared, trying so hard to hide both. Saw the marks glowing through his shirt, constant now because the stress wouldn't let them rest. Saw the way he'd looked at her when she'd kissed him goodbye, like she was the only real thing left in his world. Clara wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the stars. She'd never been particularly brave. Her whole life had been about surviving, keeping her head down, not making waves. Marrying Ethan had been the most reckless thing she'd ever done, and even that had been calculated. A risk, yes, but one with clear parameters. This was different. This was riding alone through dangerous territory toward an uncertain hope, leaving behind the one person she'd started to care about more than her own safety. This was the kind of stupid, desperate gamble that got people killed. But what was the alternative? Watch Ethan hang for something he didn't do? Go back to that ranch alone, knowing she'd let fear stop her from trying? No. She'd rather die out here than live with that. Clara dozed fitfully until dawn, then was back in the saddle as soon as there was enough light to see. The terrain grew rougher as she traveled northwest, scrubland giving way to rocky hills, then forest as elevation increased. Dodge's directions were good, but vague in places, and twice Clara had to backtrack when the trail she was following dead-ended at impassable ravines. On the second day, she ran into trouble. It was late afternoon, shadows lengthening through the pines, when Clara heard voices ahead. She reined in immediately, heart jumping into her throat. The voices were male, rough, and there were at least 3 of them. Clara guided the mare off the trail and into the trees, moving as quietly as possible. She dismounted and crept forward on foot, trying to see who was ahead without being seen herself. Through the branches, she spotted them, 4 men lounging around a small fire, their horses tied nearby. They looked like prospectors or drifters, the kind of men who lived in the spaces between towns and laws. One was cleaning a rifle, another was skinning a rabbit. The trail Clara needed went right past their camp. She backed away carefully, mind racing. She could wait until dark and try to slip past. Or she could find another route, though that might cost her hours she didn't have. Or she could approach openly, pretend to be a lost traveler, hope they'd let her pass. The decision was made for her when her boot snapped a branch. The sound cracked through the quiet forest like a gunshot. All four men looked up sharply, hands moving toward weapons. "Who's there?" one called out. "Show yourself." Clara froze. Running would just confirm she was a threat. She stepped out from the trees, hands visible and empty, trying to look unthreatening. "Sorry," she said, voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm just passing through." The four men stood, spreading out slightly. The one with the rifle kept it pointed loosely in her direction. Up close, they looked even rougher. Unshaven, clothes stained with dirt and old blood, eyes calculating. Passing through alone? The speaker was older, maybe 50, with a scar bisecting his left cheek. "That's dangerous for a woman." "I'm aware," Clara replied, "but necessary." "Where you headed?" "North. Family business." Scarface smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Funny. Ain't nothing north of here but mountains and mining camps. Hard journey for family business." Clara forced herself to stay calm. These men were predators sizing up prey. Show fear and they'd pounce. "My family's business, not yours." One of the other men laughed. "Got some spine, this one." "Nice horse," Scarface observed, looking past Clara to where the mare stood visible through the trees. "Good saddle, too. Expensive gear for someone traveling alone." "It's borrowed." "Is it now?" Scarface took a step closer. Clara's hand drifted toward the revolver at her hip, the one Dodge had given her, the one she'd never actually fired. Scarface noticed. "You know how to use that?" "Well enough." "I doubt that." He gestured to his companions. "Here's how this goes. You leave the horse, the saddle, whatever money you've got. In return, we let you walk away." "No," Clara said flatly. Scarface's expression hardened. "Wasn't really a negotiation, lady." The men began closing in. Clara drew the revolver, hands shaking but grip firm. "I said no." "You gonna shoot all four of us?" one of the younger men asked, grinning. "Even if you drop one, the rest will be on you before you can reload." He was right. Clara knew he was right. But she also knew if she gave up the horse, she'd never reach Silverton in time. Ethan would die because she'd been too scared to fight back. "Maybe I won't get all of you," Clara said, aiming at Scarface. "But I'll get you first. That a risk you want to take?" Scarface stopped advancing. For a long moment, they stood in tense tableau. Clara with the gun, the four men surrounding her, everyone calculating odds and consequences. Then a voice rang out from the trees. "She's not alone." Everyone whipped around. A figure stepped into view, a woman, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing men's clothes and carrying a Winchester rifle with casual competence. She looked about 40, with sun-weathered skin and gray streaking through her dark hair. "This woman's under my protection," the stranger continued, leveling the rifle at Scarface. "And unlike her, I know exactly how to use this. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to back away nice and slow, mount up, and ride south. You don't look back. You don't follow. And you thank whatever powers you believe in that I'm in a generous mood." Scarface's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you." "I'm making it concern me." The woman's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "You've got 5 seconds to start moving. 1. The four men exchanged glances. The woman didn't bother counting further. She just chambered around with a sharp metallic click. All right, Scarface said, hands rising. "We're going." They backed toward their horses, moving slowly but steadily. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding south, casting dark looks back, but not stopping. The woman kept her rifle trained on them until they disappeared into the trees. Then she lowered it and turned to Clara. "You can put the gun down now. Fight's over." Clara realized she was still aiming at empty air. She lowered the revolver with trembling hands. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if... You'd probably be walking back to wherever you came from without your horse or your dignity." The woman slung the rifle over her shoulder. "Name's Ruth. Ruth Calloway." Clara Crow. Clara holstered the revolver, trying to stop her hands from shaking. "I'm grateful for the help." "Don't mention it. Those boys have been causing trouble for weeks. Someone needed to scare them off." Ruth's sharp eyes assessed Clara. "You really traveling alone? Because that's beyond foolish out here. It's complicated. It always is. Ruth walked to where her own horse was tied, a sturdy roan with scarred flanks. You heading to Silverton? Claire's surprise must have shown because Ruth smiled slightly. Only thing north worth reaching in a hurry, Ruth explained, and you've got that desperate look, the one that says you're racing something you can't outrun. Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But Ruth had just saved her life. That had to count for something. My husband's on trial, Clara said, for a massacre he didn't commit. I'm trying to reach Silverton to find a witness who can prove his innocence. Ruth absorbed that. When's the trial? 2 days from now, in Fort Davis. Fort Davis is 4 days' hard ride from here. Even if you find your witness today, you'll never make it back in time. I have to try. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then she untied her horse. I'm going to Silverton anyway. Might as well ride together. Safer that way. And I know shortcuts that'll save you time. You don't have to. Didn't say I had to. Said I would. Ruth mounted up. Come on. Daylight's wasting. They rode together through the afternoon and into evening, covering ground faster than Clara had managed alone. Ruth knew the terrain intimately, guiding them along game trails and through passes Clara would have missed. She didn't ask questions about Ethan or the trial, didn't pry into Clara's story, just rode and occasionally pointed out landmarks. As they made camp that night, Ruth finally broke the silence. This husband of yours, what's his name? Ethan. Ethan Crow. Ruth's hands paused while building the fire. The marked one? The man they say killed Red Hollow? He didn't do it. You sure about that? Yes, Clara said firmly. He's not a killer. He's just different. Dangerous, maybe, but not evil. Ruth finished the fire and sat back, studying Clara across the flames. I've heard of him, the marked one. People tell stories, say he can stop bullets, crush a man's skull without touching him, survive the war when everyone else in his unit died. Some of that's true, Clara admitted. Some is exaggeration, but none of it makes him a murderer. And you believe that because you love him, or because you know it? The question caught Clara off guard. Did she love Ethan? She'd married him for survival, stayed because she refused to run from fear. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. When had caring about his pain become more important than her own safety? When had his absence started to feel like missing a part of herself? Both, Clara said quietly. I believe it because it's true, and because I love him. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. The words felt too big, too vulnerable, but they also felt right. Ruth nodded slowly. Then we'd better get you to Silverton fast. Man's lucky to have someone willing to fight this hard for him. They reached Silverton on the afternoon of the third day, exhausted and saddle-sore. The town clung to the mountainside like a growth, buildings stacked haphazardly wherever flat ground could be found. The main street was thick with miners, prospectors, merchants, all the chaos of a boomtown riding the edge of silver deposits. Clara and Ruth split up to search for Victor Marsh. Clara started with the mining supply shops while Ruth checked the saloons and boarding houses. An hour of fruitless questioning later, Clara was starting to panic. The town was bigger than she'd expected, and nobody seemed to know anyone named Victor Marsh. She was standing in the middle of the street trying to figure out where to search next when Ruth appeared at her elbow. Found him, Ruth said. Boarding house on the east edge, but there's a problem. What kind of problem? He's drunk. Has been for days, apparently. The landlady says he holes up in his room, drinks himself unconscious, wakes up and starts over. Clara's heart sank. Will he even be coherent? Only one way to find out. The boarding house was a sagging 2-story structure that smelled like mildew and desperation. The landlady, a tired woman in a stained apron, pointed them toward the stairs. Room 6, but I'm warning you, he's not in a social mood. Clara climbed the narrow stairs, Ruth following. Room 6's door was scarred and listing slightly on its hinges. Clara knocked. No answer. She knocked harder. Mr. Marsh, I need to speak with you. It's urgent. A long silence, then a gravelly voice. Go away. I can't. It's about Red Hollow. Another pause. Then the sound of shuffling footsteps. The door opened a crack, revealing a man's face, middle-aged, unshaven, bloodshot eyes sunken in a gaunt face. This was Victor Marsh, former Union officer. He looked like a ghost. "What about Red Hollow?" His voice was hoarse. "I need to know what really happened there. Who really killed those people?" Marsh's expression twisted. "I don't talk about Red Hollow." "A man's going to die if you don't," Clara said urgently. "Ethan Crow. They're putting him on trial for the massacre. But he wasn't there, was he?" Marsh flinched. "How do you know?" "Because you wrote him a letter 6 months ago saying he was innocent, saying the real killer was still out there." Marsh stared at her. Then abruptly he swung the door open wider. "Get in, quick!" Clara and Ruth entered the small room. It was a disaster, clothes strewn everywhere, empty bottles crowding every surface, the bed unmade. Marsh locked the door behind them and stumbled toward the single chair, sinking into it heavily. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "It's not safe." "Why not?" "Because they don't want the truth coming out." Marsh reached for a half-full bottle on the table. "The people who made us, who created the marked soldiers, they've been covering it up for years." Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "Who made you?" "Department of Special Operations, Secret Union Program." Marsh took a long drink. "They took volunteers, soldiers who were desperate or brave or stupid, and they did things to us. Alchemy, some kind of experimental science, burned symbols into our skin that gave us power, made us into weapons." "Ethan told me about the marks," Clara said, "about how he got them from a dying soldier." "It doesn't work that way naturally," Marsh said. "The marks are supposed to be controlled, contained. They're not supposed to transfer between people. But something went wrong with our batch. The symbols became infectious. When we died, they'd sometimes jump to whoever was touching us. Ethan said he grabbed a dying soldier and caught the marks." "Yeah." Marsh's hands shook as he set down the bottle. "There were 50 of us in the program originally. By the end of the war, maybe 20 survived. Most lost control of the power, burned themselves out. Some went insane. A few—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "A few became killers." "Like at Red Hollow," Clara said quietly. Marsh nodded. "His name was James Garrett, one of the strongest marked soldiers we had, but he couldn't control it anymore, couldn't stop the power from taking over. He deserted, went rogue, and he ended up at Red Hollow." "What happened there?" "I was part of the unit sent to bring him in," Marsh said, his voice hollow. "We got there too late. Found the whole settlement burning. Bodies everywhere, men, women, children, all killed by marked power. We could tell because of the burns, the way things were torn apart." He closed his eyes. Garrett was standing in the center of it all, covered in blood, laughing. The marks had taken him over completely. He wasn't human anymore. Ruth made a low sound of disgust. Clara felt sick but forced herself to keep listening. "We tried to capture him," Marsh continued, "but he was too strong, killed 3 of our men before we brought him down. Even then, it took all of us working together to stop him, and when he finally died—" Marsh's voice cracked. "The marks transferred. One of our soldiers caught them. Private named Crow." Clara's breath stopped. "Ethan." "No." Marsh opened his eyes. "Not Ethan. His brother." The room went utterly silent. Clara stared at Marsh, trying to process what she'd just heard. "Ethan had a brother?" "Twin brother, Michael Crow." Marsh leaned forward, elbows on knees. "They served in different units. Ethan with the Confederates, Michael with us. Neither knew the other was marked until it was too late. When Michael caught Garrett's marks at Red Hollow, he became infected with the same madness. Within weeks, he was killing again. 3 settlements in Colorado, just like I wrote in that letter." "Where is he now?" Ruth asked sharply. "Dead. We finally caught up with him near Silverton, put him down for good. But the damage was done. People had seen him, knew he was marked, knew his name was Crow." Marsh looked at Clara with haunted eyes. When word spread about the Red Hollow massacre and a marked soldier named Crow, everyone assumed it was Ethan, the Confederate fighter, the one who'd survived when so many others died. Nobody knew about Michael. Clara's mind raced. "You have to come testify. You have to tell them this." "I can't." "What do you mean you can't? An innocent man is going to hang—" I know, Marcia's voice cracked. I know, and it's been eating me alive for years. That's why I wrote that damn letter, trying to warn him. But if I testify, if I tell the truth about the program, about what the government did to us, he shook his head. They'll kill me. The Department of Special Operations is still active, still covering up the marked soldiers. Anyone who talks disappears. So you're just going to let Ethan die to save yourself? Claire's voice shook with fury. I'm one man. What good does it do if we both die? Claire stood abruptly, anger overriding fear. You're a coward. You claim you've been suffering, but you're alive, drunk and miserable, but alive. Ethan's been isolated for 10 years because of your brother's crimes. He's been hunted, feared, treated like a monster, and now he's going to be executed for murders he didn't commit, while you sit here in this filthy room and drink yourself to death out of guilt. Marsh flinched with each word like they were physical blows. You want redemption? Clara continued. Here it is. Come testify. Tell the truth. Save an innocent man's life. And if the department comes for you afterward, at least you'll die having done something right. Marsh stared at her, something shifting in his ravaged face. You really believe he's worth it? Worth risking everything? Yes, Clara said without hesitation. Because he's a good man trapped in an impossible situation. Because he deserves better than being executed for someone else's crimes. And because I'm his wife, and I'll fight for him until there's no fight left in me. The room fell silent. Marsh looked down at his shaking hands, at the marks that must be hidden somewhere beneath his sleeves. His own burden, his own curse. Finally he spoke. I'll need proof. Documents. If I'm going to testify, I need evidence that Michael existed, that he was at Red Hollow. Do you have that evidence? Some of it. I kept Michael's military file, photographs, deployment records. Thought maybe someday I'd have the courage to... He stopped. They're in a safety deposit box at the bank. We can get them in the morning. We don't have until morning, Clara said. The trial starts tomorrow afternoon. We need to leave now. Marsh looked at the window where darkness had fallen. You want to ride through the mountains at night? I want to save my husband. Ruth stepped forward. I know these trails well enough to navigate in the dark. It's risky, but if we push hard, we might make Fort Davis by tomorrow evening. Might isn't good enough, Clara said. It's all we've got. Marsh stood on unsteady legs, swaying slightly. Let me get the documents. And something to eat. I haven't been sober in a week. I need food in me if I'm going to make this ride. They waited while Marsh cleaned himself up and retrieved the evidence from the bank. By the time they were ready to leave, it was past midnight. Clara felt exhaustion pulling at her, but adrenaline kept her upright. They had maybe 18 hours to cover 4 days' worth of distance. It should have been impossible. They rode through the night with a desperation that bordered on madness. Ruth led them along shortcuts that were barely trails, rocky paths that threatened to break the horses' legs or send riders tumbling into ravines. Marsh rode hunched and silent, clutching a leather portfolio that held Michael's documents. Clara just focused on staying in the saddle and keeping the mare moving forward. Dawn found them halfway to Fort Davis, exhausted and saddle-sore. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and force down some food, but Clara couldn't sit still. Every minute felt like losing ground. We're not going to make it, Marsh said quietly, staring at the horizon. Even if we don't stop again, we'll arrive hours after the trial ends. Then we ride faster, Clara said. The horses are nearly done. I don't care. We keep going. Ruth laid a hand on Clara's arm. Clara, he's right. We're pushing too hard. If we kill the horses, we don't make it at all. Clara wanted to scream, wanted to rage at the unfairness of being so close, but still too far. Instead, she took a shaky breath and nodded. How much time do we need? She asked. If we maintain a steady pace, we'll reach Fort Davis by late evening, Ruth said. The trial will be over, but maybe they won't have executed him yet, Clara finished. The words felt like swallowing glass. Maybe we can stop it before they carry out the sentence. It was a thin hope, but it was all they had. They rode on through the day, pushing as hard as they dared. The landscape blurred around Clara, trees, rocks, sky, all melting together into one endless stretch of distance between her and Ethan. She kept replaying their last conversation, the way he'd looked at her through those bars, the kiss that had tasted like goodbye. She hadn't said she loved him. Why hadn't she said it? Late afternoon brought Fort Davis into view, sprawling in the valley below. Clara's heart leapt, then immediately sank. Even from here, she could see a crowd gathered in the main square, could see the scaffold that had been erected near the courthouse. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." "There's still time," Ruth said, but her voice lacked conviction. They pushed the horses into a final gallop, racing down the slope toward the fort. As they got closer, Clara could make out individual faces in the crowd, could see the figure standing on the scaffold with hands bound. Ethan. He was still alive. The trial was over, but they hadn't hanged him yet. Clara didn't slow down as they reached the gates. She rode straight through the gathering crowd, people scattering and shouting. Ruth and Marsh followed, creating a wake of chaos. "Stop!" Clara screamed. "Stop the execution!" On the scaffold, Marshal Rourke turned, his face darkening when he saw her. The executioner paused, noose in hand, and Ethan's head came up, eyes finding Clara in the crowd. She saw shock, hope, fear, all flash across his face in rapid succession. Clara hauled the mare to a halt at the base of the scaffold, nearly falling as she dismounted. "You can't execute him. I have proof he's innocent." "Mrs. Crow," Rourke said coldly. "You're too late. The trial is concluded. Sentence has been passed." "I don't care. I have a witness." Clara grabbed Marsh's arm, pulling him forward. "This is Victor Marsh, former Union officer. He was at Red Hollow. He knows who really committed the massacre." Marsh climbed down from his horse, clutching the portfolio. He looked terrified but held his ground. "It's true. Ethan Crow is innocent." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rourke's expression hardened. "This is irregular. The trial is over." "Then start a new one," Clara snapped. "Or are you so eager to hang an innocent man that you won't even hear evidence?" Rourke stared at her, clearly calculating. The crowd was watching now, interested. If he refused to hear the evidence, he'd look either incompetent or corrupt. "Fine," he said finally. "Bring your witness to the courthouse. We'll convene the panel again, but this had better be legitimate, Mrs. Crow, or you'll face charges for obstruction." Clara didn't care about threats. She looked up at Ethan, still standing on the scaffold with the noose inches from his neck. "Hold on," she said. "Just hold on a little longer." Ethan stared down at her, and Clara saw tears on his face. He nodded once, sharp and desperate. They reconvened in the courthouse, the panel of local officials looking annoyed at being recalled. Rourke stood as prosecutor, his witness, the supposed Red Hollow survivor, seated near the front. Clara, Marsh, and Ruth took seats near Ethan, who'd been brought in still bound but without the noose. "This had better be good," the head panelist, a judge named Morrison, said irritably. "We already heard a full day of testimony." "It will be," Clara said. She nodded to Marsh. "Tell them." Marsh stood slowly, his hand shaking as he opened the portfolio. "My name is Victor Marsh. I served as a captain in the Union Army's Department of Special Operations during the war. I was present at Red Hollow Settlement in June 1865, immediately after the massacre." The courthouse went dead silent. "The man who killed those people wasn't Ethan Crow," Marsh continued. "It was his twin brother, Michael Crow. Michael was part of our unit, a marked soldier who'd been enhanced through a military program. He'd caught the marks from another soldier named James Garrett, who was the original killer. When Michael became infected with Garrett's madness, he went rogue and committed additional murders." "This is absurd," Rourke interjected. "Twin brother? That's convenient. I have proof." Marsh pulled out documents, photographs, deployment records. "This is Michael Crow's military file. Here's his photograph. You can see he's identical to Ethan. Here are the deployment records showing he was in the Red Hollow region in June 1865. And here." He produced a death certificate. "Here's proof that Michael Crow was killed by federal troops in Colorado 3 months later, after massacring 2 more settlements." The documents were passed to Judge Morrison, who examined them with growing interest. Clara watched Rourke's face darken. "These could be forged," Rourke said. "They're not," Marsh replied. "And I'm willing to swear under oath that everything I've said is true. I was there. I saw Michael Crow commit those murders. Ethan Crowe is innocent. Judge Morrison looked up from the papers. Marshal Rourke, do you have anything that contradicts this evidence? Rourke's jaw worked. My witness? Your witness, Marsh interrupted, either never saw the killer's face clearly or is lying for money. Because I'm telling you with absolute certainty, it wasn't Ethan Crowe at Red Hollow. Morrison turned to Rourke's witness, a nervous-looking man who'd been shrinking in his seat. Well, do you have anything to say? The witness looked between Rourke and Marsh, clearly panicking. I saw someone marked. Someone with the symbols. They said his name was Crowe. But did you know there were two Crows? Marsh pressed. Did anyone tell you that before you agreed to testify? The witness's silence was damning. Morrison set down the documents. This is more than enough to create reasonable doubt. Marshal Rourke, unless you have additional evidence that specifically places Ethan Crowe at Red Hollow, not just a marked soldier named Crowe, but Ethan specifically, I'm overturning the verdict. You can't. I can, and I am. This man was convicted on mistaken identity and incomplete information. Morrison gestured to Ethan. Remove his bonds. He's free to go. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others shouted protests. Rourke looked like he wanted to overturn the table, but he was powerless against the judge's ruling. Clara didn't hear any of it. She was already moving toward Ethan, who stood frozen in shock as the deputies removed his ropes. The moment his hands were free, Clara reached him. She threw her arms around him without thinking, without caring about propriety or the watching crowd. Ethan caught her, his own arms wrapping around her so tightly it hurt. You came back, he said hoarsely into her hair. You actually came back. I promised I would. Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes were red, tears still wet on his cheeks. I thought I'd never see you again, when they put that noose around my neck. Don't. Clara pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. You're alive, that's all that matters. I love you, Ethan said suddenly, urgently. I should have said it before, should have told you 100 times. But I love you, Clara. You're the only thing that kept me human through all of this. Clara felt her own tears spill over. I love you too, so much it scares me. They kissed there in the courthouse, surrounded by chaos, and for just a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. When they finally broke apart, Clara saw Ruth and Marsh watching from nearby, both smiling slightly. Thank you, Clara said to Marsh. You saved his life. You saved mine first, Marsh replied, gave me a reason to stop drinking myself to death. That's worth something. They left Fort Davis that evening, too exhausted to ride far but desperate to be away from that place. A few miles out, they made camp in a small valley. Ethan sat close to Clara, their sides pressed together, neither willing to let the other out of touching distance. What happens now? Clara asked quietly. Ethan looked down at his hands, where the marks still glowed faintly in the firelight. I don't know. The marks aren't going away. People will still be afraid of me. Then we'll deal with it, together. Clara. No more arguments, she said firmly. No more trying to protect me by pushing me away. We're in this together, Ethan. Whatever comes next, we face it as a team. Ethan stared at her. Then a small smile crossed his face, the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. You're terrifyingly stubborn. Someone has to be. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. Thank you. For everything. For not running. For believing in me. For fighting when I'd already given up. That's what love is, Clara said simply. Fighting when giving up would be easier. They sat together under the stars while Ruth and Marsh dozed on the other side of the fire. The marks on Ethan's skin glowed soft gold, but for once they didn't seem threatening. Just part of him, like everything else. Clara had come to this marriage expecting nothing but survival. She'd found something infinitely more valuable. A man worth fighting for, worth believing in. A partnership forged through fear and trust and desperate hope. She'd found home. The journey back to the ranch took 5 days, and every mile felt like shedding weight they'd carried for too long. Ethan rode beside Clara, their horses so close their legs occasionally brushed. He still wore gloves, still carried the marks beneath his clothes, but something fundamental had shifted. The desperate tension that had coiled through him for years had loosened, not gone, but manageable now. Ruth and Marsh traveled with them for the first 3 days before splitting off toward Silverton. Before they parted ways, Marsh pulled Ethan aside. "I'm sorry," the older man said quietly, "for letting you carry Michael's crimes all these years, for being too much of a coward to speak up sooner." Ethan was silent for a moment. Then, "You spoke up when it mattered. That's what counts. Your wife's remarkable, you know. She threatened me, shamed me, and somehow made me want to be better all at once." Ethan glanced at Clara, who was saying goodbye to Ruth. "Yeah, she does that. She does." Marsh extended his hand. Ethan hesitated only briefly before taking it, gloves and all. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked. "Find others like us. Other marked soldiers who survived the program. Help them if I can. Warn them about the department." Marsh's grip tightened. "I spent 10 years drowning in guilt. Time to do something useful with whatever's left of my life." After Ruth and Marsh departed, the landscape opened up before Ethan and Clara, vast, empty, theirs. They rode without urgency, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. At night they made camp under stars that felt closer out here than anywhere else. On the fourth night, as they lay wrapped in bedrolls near the fire, Clara asked the question that had been circling in her mind. "Do you miss him, Michael?" Ethan was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Every day. We were twins, not just brothers, but the other half of each other. When the war separated us, it felt like losing a limb, and when I heard he'd died..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I never knew the truth. Never knew he'd become what I was terrified of becoming. Maybe if I'd found him sooner, if we'd faced the marks together..." "You can't think like that," Clara said gently. "Michael made his choices. You made yours. And your choice was to fight for control, to protect people even when it cost you everything. Didn't feel like I was protecting anyone. Felt like I was just hiding. You were surviving. There's a difference." Clara reached across the space between their bedrolls and found his hand. Even through the glove, she could feel the warmth of the marks. "And you're not hiding anymore." Ethan's fingers closed around hers. "Because of you." They reached the ranch on the 6th day, just as afternoon sun painted the buildings gold. Dodge must have seen them coming because he was waiting in the yard. And when he spotted Ethan still alive and free, the old man's weathered face broke into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned," Dodge called out. "You actually did it." Clara dismounted, legs protesting after so many days in the saddle. "You doubted me?" "Doubted the world would let something good happen for once." Dodge helped with the horses, stealing glances at Ethan like he still couldn't believe it. "Town's been talking. Word spread about the trial, about the twin brother. People are saying maybe they were wrong about you, Ethan." "Some people," Ethan said carefully. "Not all." "No, not all, but it's a start." Dodge finished unsaddling Clara's mare. "I kept things running here while you were gone. Cattle are fine. House is standing. Though I'll warn you, couple folks came by asking questions. Didn't tell them anything, but they seemed mighty interested in your business." "What kind of folks?" Clara asked. "Official types. Said they were from some government department. Wanted to know about marked soldiers in the area." Dodge's expression darkened. "I played dumb. Sent them on their way. But they'll be back." Ethan and Clara exchanged a look. The Department of Special Operations, the organization that had created the marked soldiers in the first place. Marsh had warned them about this, about how the department silenced anyone who threatened to expose the program. "We'll deal with it when they come," Ethan said finally. "Right now, I just want to be home." Home. The word settled over the ranch like a blessing. Claire had called this place home before, but it had always felt temporary, like she was borrowing someone else's life. Now, watching Ethan walk toward the house with that careful relief in his posture, she felt the truth of it. This was home, not because of the building or the land, but because of the man she'd chosen to stand beside. The first weeks back were deceptively peaceful. Ethan threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy, fixing things that had been neglected, expanding the cattle operation, even starting to repair the old bunkhouse. Clara watched him carefully, noting how he still kept the gloves on but didn't hide inside anymore. He worked in the yard even when the sun was high. Answered when Dodge called to him. Started to exist in the world again instead of hiding from it. But the marks were still unpredictable. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled through. Not as severe as the one that had first brought them together, but enough to trigger a surge. Clara found Ethan in the barn, hands pressed against a support beam, the marks blazing through his shirt. "Talk to me," she said, approaching slowly. "It's fine. Just riding it out." "Ethan, I said it's fine." His voice was strained, the marks flaring brighter. Around them, tools rattled on their hooks. A bucket lifted slightly off the ground. Clara reached out and took his arm. Instantly, the marks dimmed, the power bleeding into her touch like it had before. Ethan gasped, sagging against the beam. "How do you do that?" he asked roughly. "I don't know, but it works." Clara kept her hand on his arm, feeling the heat pulse beneath her palm. "We should figure out why." Over the next few weeks, they experimented carefully. Clara discovered she could ground the mark's power when they surged, channeling the excess energy away before it became destructive. It didn't work every time. Sometimes the surges were too strong, too fast. But more often than not, her touch gave Ethan the control he'd been desperately seeking for years. "Maybe it's because you're not afraid," Ethan suggested one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the scrubland. "Everyone else who touches me during a surge is terrified, but you're not." "I'm terrified," Clara corrected. "I'm just more stubborn than I am scared." Ethan smiled slightly. "That tracks." A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Clara said, "We should invite Dodge to dinner sometime. Actually sit down together like civilized people." "He'd probably fall over from shock." "Good. Man needs more excitement in his life than mucking stalls." Ethan reached over and took her hand, gloves and all. They sat like that as darkness fell, two people who'd married for survival and found something infinitely more valuable. The department came 6 weeks after their return. 3 men in dark suits arrived in an unmarked carriage, their faces blank and professional. Clara saw them from the kitchen window and immediately called for Ethan. He came in from the barn, still wearing his work clothes, and they stood together on the porch as the men approached. "Mr. Crow," the lead agent said. He was middle-aged, balding, with eyes like chips of ice. "I'm Agent Harrison from the Department of Special Operations. We need to speak with you about a sensitive matter." "What matter?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Your participation in certain wartime programs, your condition." Harrison's gaze flicked to Ethan's gloved hands. "We've been monitoring former program participants, ensuring they remain stable and secure." "I'm stable," Ethan said flatly. "You can leave now." "I'm afraid it's not that simple. We have protocols." "I don't care about your protocols," Clara interrupted. "My husband was recently cleared of all charges. He's innocent, and he's not going anywhere with you." Harrison's attention shifted to her, cold calculation in his eyes. "Mrs. Crow, we're aware of the trial and the testimony provided by Victor Marsh. That testimony revealed classified information about government operations, information that cannot be allowed to spread." "Are you threatening us?" Clara asked, her voice hardening. "I'm explaining reality. The program that created marked soldiers was classified at the highest level. Its existence cannot be publicly acknowledged. Those who threaten to expose it must be dealt with." "Dealt with?" Ethan repeated slowly. "Like Michael was dealt with." Harrison's expression didn't change. "Your brother became unstable. He was eliminated for the safety of civilians. You, Mr. Crow, have been more controlled, but your recent exposure in that courtroom created complications. We need assurances that you won't become a similar threat." "What kind of assurances?" "Come with us. Submit to evaluation and monitoring. If you're deemed stable, you'll be released. If not..." Harrison left the threat hanging. Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. This was what Marsh had warned them about, the department silencing anyone who knew too much. If Ethan went with these men, he might never come back. "No," she said firmly. "He's not going anywhere." Harrison sighed. "Mrs. Crow, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Your husband is a weapon, a dangerous, unpredictable weapon. The marks give him power that could level this entire ranch if he lost control. We're offering to help manage that risk. By locking him up? By making him disappear? By ensuring public safety." "He's not a threat," Clara insisted. He's lived here peacefully for years. He's never hurt anyone. That you know of. Harrison gestured to his companions, who began moving toward the porch. Mr. Crow, we can do this cooperatively or forcibly. Your choice. Ethan's hands clenched. Clara saw the marks beginning to glow beneath his gloves, responding to the threat. The two agents reaching for him noticed and drew weapons, not guns, but strange devices that crackled with energy. Ethan, don't, Clara said urgently. That's what they want. They want you to lose control so they can justify taking you. They're not giving me another option. There's always another option. The agents were almost on them now. Clara made a split-second decision and stepped between them and Ethan, arms spread. If you want him, you go through me first. Harrison's jaw tightened. Move aside, Mrs. Crow. No. We will remove you by force if necessary. Then you'll have to explain to whatever judge you answer to why you assaulted a civilian on her own property. Clara's voice was steel. Go ahead. Make this public. See how well your classified program stays secret when you're dragging innocent people out of their homes. The agents hesitated, looking to Harrison. The lead agent studied Clara with those cold eyes, clearly reassessing. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, he said. Good. Because you're trying to destroy my husband's life based on fear and paranoia. Clara held her ground. He's not a threat. He's a man trying to live in peace, and I won't let you take that from him. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured sharply to his men. Stand down! The agents stepped back, holstering their devices. Harrison approached Clara, stopping just at the bottom of the porch steps. I'll give you one chance, he said quietly. Prove he can control the marks. Prove he's not a danger. Because if there's even one incident, one moment where he loses control and people get hurt, we'll be back. And next time, there won't be any negotiation. That's all we're asking for, Clara said. A chance. Harrison nodded once, then turned and walked back to the carriage. His men followed. Within moments, they were gone, leaving only dust and tension in their wake. Clara's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the porch railing for support, breathing hard. Behind her, Ethan let out a shaky breath. You shouldn't have done that, he said. If they'd decided to take you too, then we deal with it together. Clara turned to face him. That's what I keep telling you, Ethan. Together. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding on like she might disappear. Clara felt the marks through his shirt, hot and agitated, but slowly calming as they stood together. We need help, Ethan said finally. If the department comes back, if something happens that I can't control, we need people who understand this. Who can help me manage the marks? Marsh mentioned finding other marked soldiers, Clara said. Maybe we should reach out, build a network. Over the following months, that's exactly what they did. Marsh became their connection, sending letters when he found other survivors of the program, men and women scattered across the territories, all struggling with the same curse that had isolated Ethan for so long. Some refused contact, too afraid of drawing department attention, but others responded, desperate for any kind of community. The first to visit was a woman named Sarah Brennan, former nurse who'd caught the marks while treating a dying soldier. She arrived on a rainy afternoon, thin and nervous, her own marks hidden beneath long sleeves. I heard what you did at Fort Davis, Sarah said over coffee in the kitchen. Heard you proved the marked ones aren't all killers. That took courage. Desperation more than courage, Claire admitted. But the result's the same. Sarah looked at Ethan, who'd stayed across the room, maintaining his usual distance. Do you have control over the power? Sometimes, Ethan said. Getting better. My wife helps. Your wife? Sarah's eyebrows rose. How? She can ground the surges, channel the excess energy somehow. Sarah absorbed that, something like hope flickering in her expression. I've been alone with this for 7 years. I thought I was going crazy. But if there are others, if there are ways to manage it, there are, Clara said firmly. You're not alone anymore. Sarah stayed for 3 days, and during that time, Clara watched something remarkable happen. Sarah and Ethan compared experiences, trading techniques they'd developed for controlling the marks. Sarah showed him a breathing pattern that helped during minor surges. Ethan demonstrated how physical work, hard, exhausting labor, seemed to bleed off excess energy before it could build to dangerous levels. When Sarah left, she looked steadier than when she'd arrived. "Thank you," she said to both of them, "for showing me there's still hope." After Sarah came others. A former Confederate scout named Thomas, who'd been marked for 12 years. A young man named Daniel, whose marks had appeared during a railroad accident, transferred from a dying worker he'd tried to save. An older woman named Margaret, who'd survived the marks longer than anyone, 15 years of isolation and fear. The ranch became a waypoint, a place where marked people could gather safely. They didn't all come at once. The department was still a threat, and gathering too many marked soldiers in one place would draw attention. But they came in small groups, staying a few days or weeks, learning from each other and from Ethan. And slowly, Ethan changed. The desperate control he'd maintained for years eased into something more natural. The constant fear that he'd hurt someone dimmed. He started removing his gloves inside the house, letting the marks show. Started teaching the others what he'd learned, becoming a kind of reluctant mentor. Clara watched him blossom into this role and felt pride mixed with something deeper. This was who Ethan was meant to be, not a monster hiding from the world, but a leader helping others survive their own curses. A year after the trial, Clara realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, the nausea, the exhaustion, the way her body felt different, but she'd been afraid to say anything, afraid of what it might mean. Would the marks affect a child? Would Ethan's condition be passed on? When she finally told him, Ethan went very still. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "As sure as I can be without a doctor." Clara watched his face. "Are you angry?" "Angry? No. Terrified, yes, but not angry." Ethan reached for her, then stopped himself. "What if the child has marks? What if I pass this curse on?" "Then we'll deal with it. Together." Clara took his hand, pulling it to rest against her still, flat stomach. "Our child. Whatever comes, we face it as a family." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He knelt down, pressing his forehead against Clara's stomach, and she felt him shake with silent sobs, fear and hope, and overwhelming emotion all tangled together. The pregnancy was hard. Clara's body rebelled against it, making her sick for months. But Ethan was there through all of it, patient and steady. And as her belly grew, something unexpected happened. The marks began to change. During Clara's 5th month, Ethan noticed the patterns on his skin shifting, the symbols rearranging themselves into new configurations. At first he panicked, thinking the marks were becoming unstable. But then he realized they weren't getting worse. They were adapting. The surges became less frequent. When they did come, they were easier to control, like the marks were learning restraint. And when Clara touched him during a surge, the power didn't just bleed away. It transformed into something gentler, almost protective. "It's responding to the baby," Clara said one night, her hand resting on Ethan's bare chest where the marks glowed softly. "The marks know there's a child. They're changing to protect it." "That shouldn't be possible," Ethan said, wonder in his voice. "The marks are supposed to be weapons. They don't adapt, don't evolve. Maybe they do when there's a reason to." Clara smiled. "Maybe they're not just weapons. Maybe there's something more." Their daughter was born on a cold January morning, delivered by Margaret, who'd stayed at the ranch to help with the birth. The labor was long and brutal, but when Clara finally heard that first sharp cry, everything else fell away. Ethan held their daughter with shaking hands, staring at the tiny life they'd created. The baby was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair. And on her left arm, visible even through the vernix and blood, were faint golden marks. Clara's heart stopped. "Ethan, I see them." His voice was thick with emotion. "She has them. She has the marks." They waited in tense silence, watching for signs of pain or distress. But the baby just yawned, tiny fist curling against Ethan's chest. The marks on her skin glowed softly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, but they didn't surge, didn't burn, just existed as part of her, natural and harmless. "They're not hurting her," Clara whispered. "No," Ethan agreed, tears streaming down his face. "They're not." Over the following months, they discovered their daughter, they named her Anna, had inherited the marks without the curse. She could make small objects move, could sense when her parents were distressed, could somehow calm Ethan's own marks when they surged, but the power didn't control her, didn't burn or rage or threaten to explode into violence. "She's what the marks were supposed to be," Margaret said, watching Anna sleep. "Before the department weaponized them. This is the natural state. Power in balance, not at war with itself." Word spread among the marked community. A child born with controlled marks, proof that the curse could evolve into something better. More marked soldiers came to see for themselves, and many left with renewed hope. The department came too, inevitably. Harrison returned with more agents, demanding to examine Anna. Clara met them on the porch with a rifle, Ethan beside her and a dozen marked soldiers standing in the yard behind them. "You're not touching our daughter," Clara said flatly. Harrison surveyed the group, clearly calculating odds. "We just want to understand." "No," Ethan interrupted. "You want to weaponize her, like you weaponized us. Turn her into another tool for your classified programs. That's not happening." "She could be dangerous. She's a baby," Clara snapped. "And she's under our protection, all of our protection." She gestured to the marked soldiers in the yard. "You want her, you'll have to go through all of us. Think you can do that without making this very, very public?" Harrison stared at them for a long moment. Then he turned and left without another word. They came back twice more over the next year, always with veiled threats and demands for access. Each time, Clara and Ethan refused, and each time Harrison left empty-handed. Eventually, the visits stopped. The department had apparently decided the marked soldiers at Crow Ranch weren't worth the exposure risk of a public confrontation. 5 years after the trial, the ranch had transformed into something Clara never could have imagined. The main house had been expanded, the bunkhouse fully restored. 8 marked soldiers lived on the property permanently now, with others visiting regularly. They ran cattle, grew crops, created a self-sustaining community. It wasn't perfect. Surges still happened, tempers flared, power got out of control occasionally, accidents occurred. But they handled it together, using techniques they'd developed collectively. And slowly, the marked soldiers stopped being weapons and started being people again. Anna grew into a bright, curious child who climbed everything and asked endless questions. Her marks were fully visible now, covering her left arm in intricate gold patterns. She could move objects with a thought, could sense emotions, could even heal minor wounds when she concentrated. But the power was gentle, controlled, nothing like the violent force her father carried. Clara watched her daughter play in the yard one afternoon, surrounded by adults who'd once thought they were monsters. She felt Ethan come up beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "We did it," Clara said quietly. "We actually did it." "You did it," Ethan corrected. "I was ready to give up. You're the one who fought." "We fought," Clara squeezed his hand. "Together." Anna ran over, marks glowing as she lifted a small stone into the air, making it dance. "Look, Mama, I can make it spin." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Clara knelt down to her daughter's level. "Remember what we talked about? About being careful with your gift?" "I remember. The marks are special, but they're not for showing off." Anna let the stone drop gently. "Papa says they're for helping people." "Your papa's right." Claire glanced at Ethan, who was watching their daughter with such love it made her chest ache. That evening, after Anna was asleep, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch like they had so many times before. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful in the fading light. In the distance, they could see Sarah and Thomas working on the new barn, their own marks glowing as they used power to lift heavy beams. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Answering that marriage notice? Everything that came after?" Clara thought about it. The fear, the danger, the times she'd thought they wouldn't survive. But she also thought about the community they'd built, the lives they'd saved. The daughter sleeping upstairs who represented hope for all marked people. "No," she said firmly, "not for a second." "Even though I brought you nothing but trouble?" "You brought me purpose." Clara turned to face him. "I was drowning before I came here, Ethan, dying slowly in that town, invisible and forgotten. You gave me a reason to fight, gave me a family, gave me a life that matters." Ethan pulled her close, and she rested her head against his shoulder. The marks beneath his shirt pulsed warm and steady, no longer a threat, but just another part of him. I love you, he said quietly, more than I thought I could love anything. I love you too. Clara closed her eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over her. Thank you for not being perfect, for being real instead. They sat together as stars began appearing overhead, two people who'd married for survival and found salvation instead. The ranch that had been Ethan's prison had become a sanctuary. The curse that had defined him for years had transformed into something their daughter could carry with grace. And the woman who'd answered a desperate marriage notice had become the foundation of a community, the anchor that kept a dangerous man human, the proof that love could exist even in the harshest circumstances. Clara had come to Texas with nothing but fear and a willingness to survive. She'd found a home, a purpose, and a man worth fighting for. The journey had been brutal, the stakes impossibly high, the outcome uncertain until the very end, but they'd made it together. And that was everything. Years later, when Anna was grown and running the ranch herself, when the community of marked soldiers had spread across territories, when the Department of Special Operations had been exposed and disbanded, people would ask Clara about those early days, about the trial, the ride to Silverton, the moment she'd stood between armed agents and her husband. And Clara would smile and say simply, I made a choice. Every day, I chose him, chose us. And that choice saved both our lives. Because that's what love was, in the end. Not perfection or ease or safety, but choice. The decision to stand beside someone even when running would be easier, to fight for them when giving up seemed inevitable, to believe in them when the whole world said they were a monster. Clara had chosen Ethan when he was nothing but a desperate notice in a general store. She'd chosen him when he'd tried to push her away. She'd chosen him when he stood on a scaffold with a noose around his neck. And she'd keep choosing him every day for the rest of their lives. That was the real story. Not of marks or trials or federal conspiracies, but of two broken people finding each other in the harshest place imaginable and deciding they were worth fighting for. And in the end, that choice had changed everything.